Live with AP European History. Good morning, welcome, we're glad you're here. My name is Todd Beach. I teach AP European History at Eastview High School in Apple Valley, Minnesota. That's a suburb of Minneapolis and St. Paul. And this is Katie.
Hi, good morning. I'm Katie Lancey. I teach at Coral Gables High School. It's in Coral Gables, Florida, a suburb of Miami. We're happy to have you with us today, and let's get into our lesson.
So we'll give you this month at a glance, and you can see that today is the 21st. You can see we've got European expansion, global markets, and Katie's going to talk a little bit about this lesson today. But tomorrow you can see French Revolution. Take a look at Friday the 24th. We have another DBQ coming up for you on the 24th. We'll give feedback to that DBQ on the 27th. Another DBQ practice May 1st and feedback on the 4th. Then practice, feedback, practice, feedback. So you've got like 6 straight days coming up before the exam on the 13th, where you're going to get practice, feedback, and chance to really practice the skills of that DBQ. A lot of you have been asking, how do I speed up? How do I get done in 45 minutes? And part of that is going through and doing the work that like we did today. So we'll definitely help you get ready for that.
Awesome, Todd. And so again, today we are talking about the rise of global markets and European expansion, not again to Friday where we're going to practice, because I agree with Todd, that is the best way to do better on the exam in May, is to have a lot of practice doing this over and over between now and then. So for our lesson overview today, we are going to do some brief work on 18th century society and demographics. We're going to contextualize 18th century states, the rise of global markets, and the ascendancy of Britain. And these are our learning objectives and historical thinking skills and developments. And you can obviously pause the video and read those on your own. So let's get into our warm-up. Todd.
Okay, thanks, Katie. So for the warm-up today, we left you with this document yesterday, and it was a sourcing activity. So take a look in the red box. I tried to give students just a loose structure about how to go about your sourcing so that you have somewhat of a process. It isn't the only way to source, and it's really clear in some of the responses we got from yesterday that some of you have been taught really, really well, and you should continue to do that. But if you're uncertain about how do I get into the source, how do I start really taking it apart, what's inside that red box is kind of a process that'll help you. So we talk about attribution statement, then give a brief description of what's going on in the document, then hap the source. So several of you just flat out asked yesterday, when I'm doing the hap, do I have to do all 4 of those for one source? And the answer is no. You need to select one of those ways to analyze the source. And the way you select is completely up to you, which one you think will work best. And then we ask on number 4 to tell us why. If you chose audience and you describe who the audience is for the document, why is that important as it relates to your claim or your argument? And then we're also just asking you to put the document number in the parenthetical after you have worked with the source. So a lot of you are asking me about that too. You said something to the effect of, my teacher taught me to put it here, and that's what they've taught you. That's fine. I'm giving you my preference, but you're welcome to certainly do what your teacher has taught you. My preference is, as a reader, I just liked it when they put it at the end of the source. So we're going to start with this first one. And I chose one that does not earn the point, but it's a longer response. And so and it has these pieces, but let's talk about why it's not earning the point here. So it has the attribution line in the source that Louis-Simon Boiseau created. He depicted liberty using reason to destroy 2 figures that represent ignorance and fanaticism. That's the attribution line. That's really good. Then in the green, this source was made during the Enlightenment, which was a time when many intellectuals supported reason, which is true, and that's a description of the historical situation. It's not an analysis. Okay, if you're analyzing or explaining, you have to tell us how, why, or because. Okay, continuing then in the yellow, taking aspects of the scientific revolution and applying them to society. So it's a description of what happened in the Enlightenment. Okay, it's not telling us anything more. The purpose, so we're starting to use that language, which is great, of this source is to show the power of reason and how it can be used to destroy things like ignorance and fanaticism. So far that sentence is everything that is already in the document. That's kind of what the document was telling us, but there's nothing new there. And then continues, the purpose of this source is important because The fact that the artist is depicting reason being used to destroy these two figures shows the importance and power that people during the time, especially Enlightenment thinkers, attributed to reason at the time. So again, what I have down there on the bottom left is this is an attempt to discuss why this is important, but it's really a description of what's already in the source. So here we have all these pieces that we've been talking about, attribution, we've got a description, but then in the yellow, we just kind of keep talking a bit in the circle about what is already in the source. And so in the lower right, I've said it's an attempt to address purpose, but it kind of restates information that's already available in the source or document. So it's really about subtext. And we gave you a visual because we know there's going to be a visual on the DBQ, but sometimes visuals, students struggle with them because you have to read the subtext and you have to apply it into the situation that you're in. So let's go to the next slide, Katie. All right, so this one really works. This is from Gabrielle at Scripps Ranch High School in California. She has our attribution line, the painting issued by the Frenchman Louis-Simon Boiseau in 1793. Alludes to the idea that the Enlightenment had a profound effect on the French people's understanding of society and idealizations, there we go, of it. In the green, the painting depicts three figures, liberty, fanaticism, and ignorance. Rather than depicting all three on equal levels, the latter two are being struck down by liberty and the scepter of reason, indicating an increase in reason's prevalence and importance to European society. And I've written over on the side, this is a description of the contents of the document. Perfect. It's really well done. Gabrielle's building this up really well right now. In the yellow, the historical situation of France in 1793 included a revolution and reign of terror, where the absolutist monarch Louis XVI had recently been dethroned and executed, being replaced by governments that radicalized Enlightenment ideals through their violent anti-monarchist policies. The reign of terror was implemented by Robespierre, a radical who intended to ensure that all citizens in France supported the revolution by purging those who didn't, particularly monarchists, the monarchy, and nobles. So, oh my gosh, wow. Gabrielle has recognized that the date on the document was 1793. And she has thought, what's going on in France in 1793 related to this? And bingo, she's hit the French Revolution and done it really, really well. Now we're going to go further and give us the why in that kind of lilac, pinky, purple color. This is important because it illustrates that the French people were ridding their country of the king who was out of touch and unwilling to improve his country, parenthetical ignorance, and his followers who were willing to serve him, parenthetical fanaticism. It serves the notion that both Boiseau and lower class French society believed achieving liberty could require having a non-absolutist government that gave them more representation and rights, an idea heavily driven by the Enlightenment philosopher John Locke. And then again, we just like you to add the document number at the end. That's an incredible response, everybody. We've given you one that is just really flushed out. And I think Katie would probably agree that that's exceptional.
Yeah, that's outstanding.
Let's go to the next one. So
good.
Here's one.
So everyone doesn't think they have to be that long.
Exactly, they don't. But I certainly want to give you props, Gabrielle. That was amazing. Now here's one that's much shorter, and it's going to earns the point. Okay, it's from Sierra at Hingham High School in Massachusetts. In a piece he created in 1793, Louis-Simon Boiseau, that's our attribution line, depicted the ancient Greek figures of liberty and reason as they attack ignorance and fanaticism. That's a description of the contents of the document. In the yellow, his intended audience consisted of French citizens who were taught by intellectuals of the Enlightenment to esteem liberty and reason as the epitome of human existence, in contrast, I think she meant to say, to intolerance and tradition. That is an analysis addressing audience. Now in the purple, the message in this image was important to European society because it represented the rise of reason and application of logical thinking in politics, religion, and intellectual advancement among the common individuals. Doc 2, thank you for including the document number. That's a very succinct, to the point response, earns the point. It's the kind of thing, Sarah, quite frankly, that readers really love. So well done on that. And one more, I think. This is also a shorter one, and it's certainly going to earn the point from Peter at American High School in California. The light blue is our attribution line. Boiseau shared his perspective on the impact of the Enlightenment on European society through his painting About Liberty, made in 1793. In the green, we have a description. In this painting, liberty is represented by a woman who has the scepter of reason, which she is using to drive away ignorance and fanaticism, who are also depicted as women. In the yellow is an analysis of this situation. A few years before the painting was created was the start of the French Revolution. This historical situation, and in the purple we have the why, is important because The French Revolution was greatly inspired by the Enlightenment. It shows that many people were beginning to adopt Enlightenment ideals against the problems in their society to an extent which they were willing to start a revolution. Doc 2. So see how succinct these responses are and how they've built, and they have this kind of pattern of attribution, brief description. I'm going to place the hap. I'm going to tell you why it's important. Okay. That kind of process is really succinct and will help speed up your delivery of the DBQ. So I hope you found that helpful.
Yep, that is great. So as we get into our lesson today, Todd and I are going to give you some sort of broad background about the 18th century to set you up for a lot of what we're doing later in the week. So we start off with this idea of a population explosion. And prior to the beginning of the 18th century in 1700, growth is slow and there are periods of growth followed by periods of decline. But then in the 18th century, we really see steady, although you can see from the chart that's on the right that there is uneven growth, especially if you take a look at Russia, which just sort of takes off there at the beginning. But we are going to see that by almost the middle of the 19th century, we're going to have double the population in Europe. And overall, this is really caused by a decline in mortality. And so why aren't people dying? There's a variety of reasons that we'll go through. The first is that up until now, we've had these waves of bubonic plague. I know we started the course talking about the Black Death in the Middle Ages, but even since then, we've had waves of bubonic plague that have hit Europe. And then really in the 18th century, we're going to see that disappear. And so generation after generation, there's been a loss from the Black Plague, but we will see that stop. And then in number 2, we're going to see that there are improvements. Absolutists were really good at implementing some improvements in clean water supply and mitigating sewage. And so that's going to help with health. And then in 3, this is really important. We're going to see famine become rare. We're going to see overall this change in food. Nutrition is going to improve because of a wider variety of food. The agricultural and commercial revolutions will increase the food supply, and they bring these rich foods that are new, most notably the potato that's going to come in. In number 4, sort of piggybacking on that, we have infrastructure such as canal and road building. And because of that, communities are not so isolated. And when there are times that there are crop failures and impending starvation, states can get emergency supplies of food and when there's grain shortages to places. And then in number 5, and kind of relevant today, we will see the inoculation against smallpox that gets slowly implemented during this time. Starts in England and kind of disseminates, and we will see that start to improve conditions.
Okay, thank you, Katie. As she mentioned, a lot of what we're talking through today is really helping set up for Friday, especially. So just trying to keep that in mind. It does fit within the time period, but it may feel a little bit weird as we jump into French Revolution tomorrow, but just trust that this is really helping you. So we'll talk about rural industry, cottage industry, it's sometimes called. And in the A paragraph, the increase in the number of landless rural workers. So let's just break that down. What that means, again, doesn't mean they don't live on land. It means that they don't own any land. They used to own land or own portions of land or common lands, but then we had enclosure and now they are landless. And so they're trying to figure out, how do we get by? How do we work? And cottage industry kind of spurs out of that. It's a stage within the industrial development in which rural workers use hand tools in their homes to manufacture goods on a large scale for sale in a market. I'll bring your attention over then to the image. I think it's really a nice image to kind of represent that, is because we see these women working spinning wheels sitting outside of this cottage. And you see a woman in the very lower right foreground taking care of a child. So I think that's a pretty typical image, even though it was painted, in 1900, but it's depicting of that time. So a nice image to kind of give us this context of rural industry. In the B paragraph, 18th century system of rural industry in which a merchant loaned or put out raw materials to cottage workers who process them, return them to the finished products to the merchant. So we call that the putting out system. And you have kind of a merchant that's going from place to place, working with, okay, you take this wool, you spin it into yarn, you take this spun yarn, you dye it, you take this and you put it into a bolt of material, and that's going to then eventually get produced into something else. And the merchant is the one doing, the kind of the entrepreneur, the one working all these different parts of production. And in this, so we go to C, divisions of production would be broken into these stages, as I mentioned. One group of workers would spin the raw wool into thread, another would bleach it, another dye it. This would weave it into cloth. This happened as industries grew in scale and complexity. The other thing we should mention, I don't think I have it in here, but because of those changes that have taken place in agriculture, and it's kind of alluded to in that population chart that Katie just had, because food is more abundant, we're starting to see people, because it's more abundant, it's less expensive. And now we're seeing people that they have money to buy other goods because of that. So this cause effect of the economics of it is important. Indeed, the advantages are you have an abundance of underemployed laborers, these landless peasants, that allows industries to develop rapidly. Production was unregulated, though. That's a disadvantage. It's a disadvantage and an advantage. It's unregulated, so it doesn't have to meet these guild standards, but sometimes the quality of that isn't as good. And the English industry becomes, by 1700, much more rural than urban.
Okay, so thanks, Todd. For today, for our guided practice, I just wanted to introduce you to a couple of sources and look at the idea of continuity and change over time. And the first source number one, is by Samuel Bemford. He's an English radical reformer. It's a description of Middleton, England, outside Manchester in the early 1700s in his work, The Early Days. So let's just read through that. The farming was generally done by the husband and other males of the family, whilst the wife and daughters attended the churning, cheese making, and household work. And when that was finished, they busied themselves with carding and spinning wool or cotton, as well as forming it into warps for the looms. The husbands and sons would next, at times when farm labor did not call them, size the warp, dry it, and beam it into the loom. A farmer would generally have 3 or 4 looms in the house, and then, what with the farming, the housework, the carding, spinning, and weaving, there was ample employment for the family. So I think this goes really nicely with the image that Todd just was showing from the cottage industry, and that's a description. And then we're moving forward, and I just want to kind of have you start thinking about what we're going to do on Friday. And if you look at source number 2, this is Friedrich Engels, the son of a wealthy cotton manufacturer, the condition of the working class in England in 1844. If you were going to be sourcing this document, I think you could probably come up with some pretty excellent historical situation for this document, thinking ahead to 1848, when he is going to co-author a pretty important work. So let's read through this. Everywhere heaps of debris, refuse, standing pools for gutters, and a stench, which alone would make it impossible for a human being in any degree civilized to live in such a district. I found 2 beds, and such bedsteads and beds, which with a staircase and chimney place exactly filled the room. In several others, I found absolutely nothing while the door stood open and the inhabitants leaned against it. Everywhere before the doors, refuse and any sort of pavement lay underneath, could not be seen but only felt here and there with the feet. This whole collection of cattle sheds for human beings was surrounded on 2 sides by houses and a factory, and on the third by the river, and besides the narrow stair up the bank, a narrow doorway alone led out to another almost equally ill-built, ill-kept labyrinth of dwellings. So as we see the change in the early 1700s into what Engels is describing in almost exactly the same area. He's describing Manchester in the second document as well. So I want you to be thinking about where we're going on Friday and look at the continuity, or in this case, the change over time for what daily life is very much probably like. And if you're thinking about practicing sourcing, I think both of these sources, you could give some practice with that if you wanted some extra practice. So I just wanted to kind of get you thinking about Friday as we're contextualizing not just the French Revolution and what we're doing tomorrow and Thursday, but Friday we're going to get into the Industrial Revolution. All right, Todd.
Those are great sources, Katie. Thank you. I really like that contrast, the change over time you talked about. We're going to talk about economic liberalism, and we mentioned Adam Smith yesterday as a figure of the Enlightenment. He's a professor of philosophy, a leading figure of the Scottish Enlightenment, and his seminal work is Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. Most historians just refer to it as Wealth of Nations. Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations. In this work, he criticizes guilds and their restrictions, and he champions free competition, which he believed would benefit all citizens. He's the one who puts forth the idea of the invisible hand of the market is what should regulate the market, not governments. And so we go to the B paragraph in economic liberalism. Smith seeks to place limits on governments, and he says, what is the purpose of government? So the source I've given you is the House of Commons, 1742. This would have been an image that would have been very common at Adam Smith's time. And it just helps us kind of set the context. What is the purpose of government? It's certainly a debatable question. Even today, we talk completely these arguments about what is government's purpose. But Smith in the 18th century is saying that this is what government should be doing. They should do, number one, they provide defense against foreign invasion. Two, they maintain civil order with courts and police protection. And three, they should sponsor certain indispensable public works and institutions that could never adequately profit private investors. So this is his kind of 18th century view of what the purpose of government should be. And this will get developed into what we call economic liberalism, a belief in free trade, competition that benefits all individuals, rich and poor. And this is going to lead to economic deregulation and attempts to end economic monopolies. So you're going to see this switch over, and Katie's going to be talking about the Atlantic economy and mercantilism, but how do we make that transfer, that change from a mercantilistic economy to more of a free market economy when for many years, mercantilism has certainly served that authority. So next slide for Katie.
And you remember we spoke about mercantilism when we were talking about absolutism in France and Colbert. And so we're coming forward into this Atlantic economy and give you a little bit of background. The expansion of European commerce accelerates the growth of a worldwide economic network. We're getting more global. The growth of trade is going to encourage economic development and military conflict, right? When you're competing for trade routes and for profits, we can see where that can lead to conflict. And we're going to see powers vie for influence during this 18th century. So in Great Britain, they have really had leadership with their origins in successful mercantilism, and particularly the Navigation Acts. So the Navigation Acts give British merchants monopolies and British ship owners monopolies on trade. Goods have to be carried on British ships, and that really cuts out other countries, particularly in sea. The Navigation Acts were really a form of economic warfare against the Dutch. And by the late 17th century, after numerous conflicts, then here in the image is a conflict as a representation of the First Anglo-Dutch War. We're going to see the Dutch Republic start to fall behind. They'd been this huge economic and shipping powerhouse, but we're going to start to see England really taking the lead in trade with their colonies. And this is really going to just leave France as the most serious rival. And we're going to see conflict between England and France during this beginning and into the end of the 18th century. We're going to see them fight a series of wars to become the leading maritime power. And again, we're just going over this briefly, but we have the conflict between the French and the British in the 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian War, if you've already taken American history. And then, of course, the French support for the Americans and the American Revolution. So again, we're not going into those particular conflicts, but just to give you some background here. And then I started earlier in our lessons talking about the Columbian Exchange. And during this time period, we tend to refer to, and I'm sure at some point you guys have already covered this in world history, the trade triangle. So commercial exchange is often referred to as triangle trade, explaining a three-way transportation of goods. We have European commodities such as guns and textiles sent to Africa, enslaved Africans sent to the colonies in the New World, and raw materials and goods from the colonies such as cotton, sugar, tobacco, those cash crops that are really important. And that also brings us into what we're going to do Friday with the Industrial Revolution, because cotton is going to become so important. And so this trade triangle gives you sort of an overview picture of that. We're not getting into the slave trade, although we did cover it a little bit in one of our earlier lessons. But this trade triangle does a few things. In the B paragraph, many of these new products are going to require processing. So that's going to lead to new manufacturing jobs in England. And we're going to see the ascension of London become the wealthiest city in the West. And really, we're going to start to foreshadow Great Britain as the economic powerhouse it's really going to be as we move into Friday's lesson. And then just to talk about also in the C paragraph, this trade triangle is somewhat incomplete. There is an intercolonial trade. And so we see Caribbean slave colonies importing foodstuffs from the North and South of America, things like rice from the South and fish and livestock from the North. So there is an intercolonial trade going on besides the sort of triangular trade you can see on the map.
Great, thank you, Katie. So give us a little bit of feedback from the content review from today's lesson. You can go to our Twitter account. There's a poll up there today. And just let us know what you thought about the content review from today's lesson. And that is @LearningEuro on Twitter. We appreciate your feedback on that. So just a debrief and what we went through today, talking about context in which European states experience crisis, causes and consequences of maritime competition, economic and political consequences of the rivalry between Britain and France, which Katie just really developed really well. And then really sourcing a situation and then the change over time as well as causation. So, Katie's activity of change over time was a big part of what we did today.
All right, so for your exam practice today, I'm going to bring you back to something we've covered several times, but it is the beginning of your essays. On Thursday, I'm going to give you some argumentation practice. But if you see the prompt there, evaluate the most significant effect of population growth in Europe within the period 1700 to 1800. This is actually a former question on an AP exam. It's a question that could definitely be seen as a long essay question, but we are focusing on those first A and B points that you get in the rubric, which are applicable to the document-based question you're going to take on May 13th. So I would like you to do an introductory paragraph that includes a contextualization along with your claim thesis that includes a line of reasoning for this prompt, practicing these skills that you're going to do for the prompt that you get on the DBQ. So if you will do what you've been doing for many weeks now and email those to apvirtuallearning@gmail.com, I'll feature some of them in the morning tomorrow. And we so appreciate all of the hard work you're putting into this practice. We've been really consistently impressed every day. Ooh.
Thank you, Katie. Today's shout out, we have an international flavor today. And so we're going to shout out to these schools. These are students that at these schools have been sending us in a lot of feedback and a lot of their responses. So the TASIS, the American School in England, in London, a shout out to you. The International School of Aruba in Oranjestad, Aruba. I've never been to Aruba, Katie, but I bet their weather is nicer than here today. And then the American School of Marrakesh in Morocco. So students that are at those international schools, Scholar Up, you guys got this. Thank you so much for paying attention, for watching, for learning with us. A note from College Board, we know that not all students have access to the internet or a device. We're working on a solution to help students get what they need to show their best work. If you need mobile tools or connectivity or know someone who does, reach out directly to College Board at cb.org/tech.
All right. Well, I hope everybody is having a great week. Thank you again for all the awesome work that you've been doing. We continue to be so impressed. You guys are wonderful.
Thank you guys for watching. I did go through a lot of your responses and sent some feedback yesterday and today, and I have a few more I'll try to get through, but we really appreciate it. So thank you. We'll see you tomorrow.
Take care. Bye-bye.